Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association. Missouri produces wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details on the variety of products made in the state are at choosewood.com.
Good evening. I'm Ruth Ezell from the 9 Network. In partnership with St. Louis Public Radio and 5 on Your Side, we are live from the 9 Network studios, where Democratic candidates running for St. Louis County Executive, incumbent Sam Page, University City resident Jamie Tolliver, businessman and attorney Mark Mantovani, and St. Louis County Assessor Jake Zimmerman are here to take questions from a panel of journalists and St. Louis County voters. We invited to this forum the Democratic candidates. Paul Berry III and Ed Golterman are the Republican candidates. The primary is August 4th. Joining me are Jason Rosenbaum, political reporter for St. Louis Public Radio, and Casey Nolen, anchor and political reporter at 5 on Your Side. Now, the format for this debate is simple. Due to COVID-19 and social distancing restrictions, we will not have a live studio audience. For the safety of all of us in the studio, we are spaced 10 to 12 feet apart with plexiglass partitions placed between us. Each candidate will have up to 1 minute to respond. There may be follow-up questions. Before we conclude this evening, each candidate will have 1 minute for closing remarks. Executive Sam Page, the first question tonight goes to you from Casey Nolen.
Ruth, thank you. County Executive, today St. Louis County set a new record for COVID-19 cases, and it's not just the number of cases. The number of people admitted to the hospital continues to go up in St. Louis County. In fact, the head of the pandemic task force, Dr. Garza, says that this curve will become impossible to bend backwards in a positive direction without some decisive actions from the community or our elected leaders. We're at a level that we haven't seen since early May. What decisive action are you willing to take to keep more people from going to the hospital from COVID-19?
Well, thank you, Casey. First, we want to recognize that the number one duty of the county executive is to look out for the health and welfare of everyone in St. Louis County, and that's what I've done. We issued one of the first stay-at-home orders in the country here in St. Louis County, and our reopening program was cautious and thoughtful, and we're still at a 50% capacity of our businesses that are now open. So we put ourselves in a much better place than we would have been otherwise. But we have to be prepared to issue further orders, further restrictions on social distancing and gatherings if we cannot get universal mask wearing adopted in our community. And that's why I issued a mask mandate over 2 weeks ago, and we're working very diligently to get that adopted. We've received communication from our business leaders that that's important to them as well. Dr. Garza has reinforced that from the pandemic task force, and we really would like to see mask mandates in our neighboring counties as well, because there's so much movement back and forth between St. Louis County, St. Louis City, Jefferson County, and St. Charles County.
Your minute is up. Our next question from Jason to Mr. Mantovani.
It's a question for all three of you. If you were county executive right now, what would you be doing to slow the virus? Mr. Mantovani, we'll start with you.
Well, I think as the interim county executive has said, it's important that we practice those reasonable efforts that have been prescribed by the CDC and whatnot. You know, in some respects, the most important thing is to follow the advice of the CDC with respect to gearing up, using proper masking and whatnot, to cleaning up items of personal hygiene, to splitting up social distancing. And then employers have to recognize that when people are ill, they have to ease up and be less demanding of them whenever they are having health issues. With respect to closing, I think that we have to consider this in terms of a dimmer switch instead of an on and off switch. I think there has to be consultation with the health department about the kinds of efforts that need to be made in order to keep businesses operating, if they can, safely for their customers and their employees. And this is a case-by-case analysis, in my view, unless the virus worsens, when stronger actions have to be taken.
Thank you, Mr. Mantovani. Ms. Tolliver, would you care to comment?
Hi, so I absolutely agree that the mask mandate is something that was absolutely necessary. I believe that the businesses that also respond to this should be cooperated with in ways where they are aware of what the CDC is requiring and expecting of them, so that they can make sure that their employees are prepared, so that when they go home, they are also making sure that they are also following all the rules, all the mandates that are set forth. And I think that if we cooperate with the businesses that are now open, I think that we could have a much safer way of existing, because when people are leaving their house, they are leaving to go to these businesses. And if there are mandates in place where those businesses are not open nearly as long, I think that it lessens the amount of time that people spend in the streets and in the city. And so I think that the masks are great, but staying at home is often better.
Thank you. Mr. Zimmerman.
Thanks. It strikes me that what we need in this incredibly challenging moment is a little more science and a little less politics. You know, I think back to the mad scramble in the early days of this pandemic, and I think about the lack of regional coordination. I think about the time when St. Louis City opened its parks at the same time as St. Louis County was closing its parks, yet leaving adult bookstores open. And I really worry about that lack of regional coordination. And unfortunately, I see it happening again. There was reporting just in the last few days that inaccurate information about youth sports, for example, was shared with the public. And you have pediatricians saying that they were left out of discussions when they could have added an important voice. To have a situation as these virus cases rise where we're saying kids can't play softball, but it's okay to have bars open, it strikes me that something is wrong.
Thank you. Casey, Jason, any follow-up questions?
Dr. Page, why aren't the city and the county always on the same page? This is, by the way, a question that could apply to a lot of things, but none more serious than the coronavirus.
Well, the city and county are frequently on the same page. The city and county have a little bit different demographics, a little bit different organizational structure, governance, but frequently the city and the county are on the same page, and our response to this pandemic has been an extraordinary example of coordination and cooperation. When we issued our first stay-at-home orders, there were 14 pages of orders. There was one difference, and that was the bars. The bars in St. Louis County were closed, and the bars in St. Louis City were open. But we are in a political cycle, we are in an election cycle, and one of the messages is the lack of precision between the county and the city. So the footnote of the bars on those 14 pages of orders got a lot of attention. But what we've seen in the response to this pandemic has been incredible and unprecedented cooperation between the city and the county, and our health departments, in our contact tracing, and in our humanitarian relief. I think it's gone really well.
Anyone else care to weigh in?
Yeah, I'd like to make a point about that. Look, the fact of the matter is that the collaboration from the St. Louis County Executive's office throughout the region has been abysmal. The County Executive's office has collaborated with no one well. It hasn't collaborated with the mayors of the municipalities. It hasn't collaborated well with businesses. It hasn't collaborated well with parents and coaches and athletic directors and operators of sports facilities with respect to youth sports. The collaboration has been abysmal. The county executive has operated his decision-making like Moses. He descends from the mountain and tells people the way it is, and then he's frustrated that people don't abide by his direction. That's authoritative, it's dictatorial, it's not collaborative, and that's the biggest flaw with respect to the way we as a community have approached this particular situation.
Our next question will be from Casey to Mr. Mantovani.
Well, sticking with that theme, I want to just drill down on this just a little bit more, because it is so important and it looms over everything we talk about and everything we do. Just tonight, the White House Pandemic Task Force, we've learned from them that we're actually on a list of only 11 regions in the country that needs to take decisive action. Do you think we should shut it down? Do we need another shutdown, another stay-at-home order?
Look, Casey, I don't have the specific information from the CDC. I don't know whether we should be shutting everything down. I don't know what that even means. I mean, as a practical matter, what we should be doing is we should be evaluating the data, and we should be communicating with businesses, and we should be looking at the risks associated with those businesses, and then making decisions. As I said earlier, there should be a dimmer switch, not an on-off switch. Turning the economy off, as we've seen, is ruinous to many people and their livelihoods and their incomes, and it creates economic hardship across the region. Now, clearly, when lives are being lost at an accelerated rate, you have to take dramatic action. But my belief is that what we should be doing is we should be turning down the economy if the pandemic is worsening. We can and loosening it whenever it gets more manageable. And I think that's the right. Approach. But all of that has to happen in collaboration, not in dictation.
Thank you very much, Ms. Tolliver. Your comments.
So very much like I said in my first answer, I definitely believe that collaboration with the businesses that are open, where the people are going out to, I think that if we can make sure that the mandates and the policies that are CDC approved, that are approved by the World Health Organization, are followed by these businesses, I think that it will allow for it to be safer. You don't have to shut it down. But if staying at home is safer, it would be safer if the businesses were not open for people to go to. And I think that if we made it so that they were aware of the risk involved, both for themselves and their patrons, that I think that it could be a lot better. I definitely think that if we concentrate in the areas where the risk is the highest, where death tolls are the highest, where there are more people that are preconditioned to have the coronavirus, if we concentrated in those areas specifically, I think that those areas need the education. They need the communication from leadership.
Thank you, Ms. Tolliver. Tonight's questions are both informed by and in some cases come straight from our audience and topics we've heard on social media. And today, tragically, one topic a lot of people are talking about is gun violence. Let's go back to Casey.
Well, something we've in the news today, when there is a situation, unfortunately, like we had at the Galleria, whether it be a public place or frankly a more affluent place, it gets more attention. But this is not an isolated incident. We know that these incidents happen often in St. Louis County. In fact, when the governor recently convened the special session for crime, he didn't just point to St. Louis City or Kansas City. He pointed to about a 20% increase in assaults with guns in St. Louis County. So I will direct this first to you, Mr. Zimmerman. Whether it's the use of Prop P funds, whether it's the bully pulpit of the county executive office, what can the county executive do to keep people in St. Louis County safe?
We need a little more leadership. And when you think about the scourge of gun violence, it's high time that the leadership in this community stood up and said, not another dead kid in the street. It is high time that we stop playing footsie with Republican leadership in Jefferson City. These are the people trying to shove things down our throat, like guns in our schools, guns in our churches and synagogues and other places of worship. And it is high time that all of us in this region stand up to the senseless violence, whether it happens at the Galleria or whether it's the kind of tragedies that happen every day in less affluent parts of this community. We all need to rise up and say, it is not okay. It is time to stop with the culture of the backroom deals with the folks who shove this down our throats from Jefferson City. It's time to stand up for our values.
Thank you very much. Our next set of questions involves police reform. Jason, you have the floor.
St. Louis County Police Chief Mary Barton drew widespread criticism last month for disputing that there is systemic racism within her agency. And she's since clarified those comments, but they raise questions about whether she's the right person for the job. If you were elected county executive, would you recommend to the Board of Police Commissioners that Barton stay or go, and why? I'll start off with County Executive Page.
Well, thank you. So I appointed the police board that chose Mary Barton, appointed 4 members of the police board. I appointed 4 diverse individuals, but we do not have the authority as St. Louis County Executive to direct people we appoint on what to do. And they interviewed the candidates and they chose Chief Barton. And we have to, as county executive, I will work with this chief and I will try and lead the county forward and work with her leadership. I disagree with her assessment on systemic racism. We all know that systemic racism exists in our country, it exists in our community, it exists in all of our institutions, educational, access to health care, job opportunities, and law enforcement. And that's why I ordered a top-to-bottom review of our police department, and that's why that's underway. But we did have a previous county executive who worked very hard to tell his appointees exactly what to do, and that didn't go well, and now he's in prison.
Mr. Mantovani.
Yeah, so look, I don't know Chief Barton. I haven't met her. I have respect for her position. I wouldn't offer an opinion about whether or not she should stay in the position or not. I would enjoy the opportunity to work with her and build a partnership. That's where I am on that. I want to go back just for a moment and talk about the earlier question about crime. Look, nobody in this community has proposed an effective crime mitigation program in the last 10 years. As a practical matter, we need a near-term, an intermediate-term, and a long-term solution relative to mitigation of crime. We need a near-term anti-violent crime initiative, as they've done in Oakland and Boston, other places around the country. We don't have to invent the wheel here. We need an intermediate-term intermediation with playgrounds and drug addiction programs and the like, and we need a longer-term commitment in terms of creating economic growth. We have got to get a handle on the violent crime in this community. Every poll of St. Louis County residents indicates it's one of their primary concerns, and to ignore this, as we have done for the last 10 years, is unacceptable.
Thank you, Mr. Mantovani. Ms. Tolliver.
So I believe that if we're in a county, if we're in a city, if we are in a state where people are appointed to positions, it should be according to the people whether or not a person is able to keep their job. So if it is deemed by the people that the person is not doing a good job, there should be something in place where the people can decide that that person is no longer able to keep that job. So if Chief Barton is doing a poor job and the people do not feel as though they are indeed being protected and served, then they should be able to say, we don't need that, we don't want that. Systemic racism is a thing. It has been a thing for hundreds of years in this state. And I think that the people should have more say-so in how they feel that they are being protected, how they feel they're being served. Because I do not believe that leadership for hundreds of years, not to just say this current administration, but for hundreds of years, I do not feel like the people have a good say-so. They don't have a good handle on how and why they are being treated the way they are being treated, or why they are being led where they are being led to. And I think that it's time to make sure that the people have a say-so.
Thank you. Mr. Zimmerman.
Let's just say what needs to be said. It's not acceptable to have a St. Louis County police chief who denies that racism is a real thing. This is not a time for dancing around with words. This is a which side are you on moment. I get that Sam wants to have it both ways here. You know, he handpicked this police board to handpick this police chief, and then she embarrassed him. But leadership requires you to take a stand. And what leadership is not about is burying your head in the sand and pretending that problems don't exist. We cannot confront those problems until we have the courage to tackle them head on. What we don't need right now is another study. What we don't need is outside experts to tell us what we ought to already know in our hearts. What we ought to know is that racism is real in the police department and everywhere else in this community. And what we ought to commit ourselves to do for the sake of all of our kids and everyone, whether they live north or south of that Del Mar divide, is to work tirelessly to eradicate it and to have no patience for anybody who claims that the problem isn't real.
Well, I think we have to understand that the police board does pick the police chief. We can pretend otherwise. We can make grandiose statements. The county executive has to make tough decisions, many tough decisions. Some people are unhappy with those decisions, but I will always deal with my people who I appoint to try and pick good people, to put them in the position to be qualified to make decisions, and then they make the decisions. I don't always get everything I want. I don't get everything that I would like, but I am not going to try and control the decisions of people I appoint who are qualified to make those decisions. The last county executive worked very hard to try to control the decisions of people he appointed, and that did not go well. That's not how government works. And I will work with whoever is police chief. I will give Chief Barton a chance to understand the challenges of our community and to work with the person the police board chose.
I want to go back to the coronavirus for a second, because the Black Lives Matter movement is about more than police. It's about black lives. And one of the unassailable facts about the coronavirus is that black St. Louisans have been suffering more than white St. Louisans. So I want to pose a different question to the three candidates than to County Executive Page. What would you do? What would you have done to initially prevent the coronavirus from spreading so much in mid and north St. Louis County? And I'll start with Mr. Mantovani? And I'll ask a different version of the question to you, County Executive Page.
Okay, well, so look, this is no secret. This should have come as no surprise to anybody that there are health disparities in our community. Washington University has done studies on this for years, showing the different life expectancies between the area zip code 63105 and 63106 as being 18 years. This is not news. It should not have been news. And there should have been probably more focus than there was on mitigating the spread of the virus in North County. Now, at the same time as saying that, I think the virus caught a lot of people internationally by surprise. And I'm willing to allow the county executive and the health department a little bit of a break relative to the fact that most of us didn't see it coming to the extent that it became a problem. But it should have been clear that those who were working jobs that involved the public, those who have healthcare issues, pre-existing healthcare issues, we're going to be more victimized by the pandemic, and there probably should have been efforts to provide earlier testing. The testing was slow. There probably should have been more communication in the community than there was, and so there are a lot of things that could have been done. But look, this was new to everybody, and so it's easy at this point to say how we missed it, right, and to throw stones. And I think some things could have been done differently, but this was a very special situation.
Ms. Tolliver.
So again, I definitely believe that the essential workers should have been catered to first, simply because they were on the front line. There are several banners that say, thank you to our health heroes, and absolutely thank you for being out there on the front lines. However, we should have also followed the science to see who was the most susceptible among us, and that definitely was the people in North County. That was definitely in the high areas of African American residency, and I think that they seem to have gotten theirs less. We will definitely hear of people who were more advantaged, and they and their families were able to get testing sooner than other people. And I think that it is absolutely egregious that more people were dying that did not look like those in those nice, fine areas, those who were brown and black-skinned. And I think that if we had catered to that, those with the pre-existing conditions, the elderly, and those people of color first, I think that we could have slowed down the cases, because if the majority of cases are happening in those communities, then those are the communities, those should be ground zero. That's where we should have started.
Assessor Zimmerman.
Jason, the numbers here are stark. You are 4 times as likely to get this virus if you're a person of color who lives in North St. Louis County, and you're 4 times as likely to die from the virus. The virus does discriminate, and anybody who says otherwise is full of it. And yet, because of the same old status quo influences that run the way we do public policy in St. Louis County and in this broader region, COVID-19 testing was available in places like Chesterfield and De Pere weeks, months before it was available anywhere north of Delmar Boulevard. It's not okay. It's not acceptable. We've got to do better.
Dr. Page, in addition to responding to Assessor Zimmerman's statement, I want you to tell us what your administration did to stop the spread of COVID-19 in black communities in St. Louis County.
Well, when I was sworn in over a year ago, the first thing I did was apply an equity lens to every complex problem that we have in county government. When we saw COVID coming, we initiated our task force and our response right away. Dr. Jason Purnell was brought in to provide an equity lens to our response, and that's what we did. As soon as St. Louis County could purchase tests, they were deployed in our high-risk regions, especially North County. There is a narrative, an unfortunate lie that's been told over and over in this campaign season, that for some reason the county did not provide testing where it was needed when they could. We know that testing was extraordinarily difficult to find early on. Some of our health systems were successful to find it earlier than others, and there was a 10-day gap between testing available in our community and testing available in North County, and there's been much made about that. But our response from St. Louis County has been focused like a laser on the communities most likely impacted. That's where we've dedicated our resources. That's where we've dedicated our testing. And today I announced another $7 million from our CARES Fund grants to uninsured and underinsured to improve access to health care in North County.
Any follow-up questions?
Still bad for North St. Louis County versus the rest of the county?
Well, the numbers are bad for North St. Louis County because of decades of racial segregation and economic segregation that left a community devastated. Healthcare disparities are not just access to healthcare, they're access to healthy foods, educational opportunities, job opportunities. All these contribute to health outcomes. We know that in Kinloch, the average life expectancy is 55, and it's 35 years greater in another corner of the county a few miles away. We know that healthcare disparities are tied to a lot of economic opportunity, a lot of things that are related to poverty, unemployment, job opportunities, educational opportunities. It's not just where the healthcare facilities are. And we know that. We've directed our resources in that direction. But this is a decades-long problem that has the full attention of county government for the first time ever.
I'd just like to say one thing about this. I was looking at the amount of the federal funds that have been distributed associated with COVID the other day. And $30 million have been committed of the $173 million that we got from the government. If we have a problem with individuals in North County being sicker, being more compromised because of this virus, for the life of me, why we're not investing that money more effectively in the people who need it today. You know, think about this. Whenever those decisions were made with respect to giving the county executive sole discretion over how that money was spent, we were told that this was an emergency situation. And here we are 2 or 3 months later, and 30 of the $173 million has been committed. And we've got people who are being victimized by that. That's ridiculous. If we've got the dough, use it where it's needed now. Don't let people suffer and die.
I have a question for all the candidates. The CEO of Centene had a lot of people talking about his critique of the region's talent and its ability to attract business. With the region divided, what can the county executive do to present a better sales pitch to the rest of the world? I'll start with Ms. Tolliver.
Thank you. So again, communication and education are the pillars of my platform. So in a lot of ways, I think that it's really hard to say what you're going to do in a particular area of the county, or that you never visit, that you never go to, that you only see a few times a year during campaign season. I think if we communicate with these regions that absolutely need servicing and figure out exactly what it is they need and how we can help them very specifically, as opposed to having a God complex and feeling like we're going to be able to do something for them without even knowing who they are or what they need. I think that absolutely we can make sure that the area is nicer if we know what it is that the people that live in those areas, that live and breathe in those areas and have established wealth in those areas, if we can absolutely cater to the people who need it most. And just to go back for just 1 second, if the science said that the North County area was indeed a high-risk area before COVID, the question is, why was something not done before? Because the pre-existing conditions are why they are being attacked by corona more so than anyone else. So I think that we have to communicate with the people that we are leading.
Thank you. Mr. Zimmerman, how would you present this region to the rest of the world?
Well, first we got to recognize that what Mr. Neidorf said is a wake-up call. And it's a wake-up call with real consequences. Thousands of jobs that should be right here have instead gone to North Carolina. And to me, if you stick with the same old status quo, you should expect the same old results. And the status quo may work fine for the privileged and the connected, and it may work well for a handful of powerful developers who aren't shy about putting money into politicians' pockets. But it doesn't work so well for the rest of the community, and as we've just learned from this announcement from Centene, the future it portends is a challenging one. But I see in this hope. I see in this opportunity. If the St. Louis region is going to show the rest of the country and the world who we are, then we need to rise above the petty factionalism. We need to rise above the turf wars. We need to rise above the politicians who can't check their egos at the door. And what we've got to do is commit ourselves to a broader vision, and one that includes everybody, not just the privileged few.
Mr. Mantovani, your comments?
Yeah, so look, first of all, this shouldn't have been a wake-up call. If it woke Jake up, then he was already sleeping, because I've been saying this stuff for 2 or 3 years. Mr. Neidorf's exactly right. We're falling behind nationally because our economic development apparatus has been out of control, ineffective, disorganized, uncoordinated. The dots aren't connected, and it's the county executive's responsibility to get this done. We have a decent story to tell here in St. Louis about our amenities, about the low cost of living. We just need people who are committed to do it. As a practical matter, if you're the chief executive of an enterprise and you're not out selling on behalf of your enterprise, you're not doing your job. And I have never once heard the county executive, or Mr. Zimmerman for that matter, communicate any interest or ability with respect to how we're going to grow this region. We can't solve our fundamental challenges, social and otherwise, if we don't tackle our economic development situation. I've got a plan. I've got 100 thoughts on this thing. I'd love to walk you all through them as time goes by. This is the preeminent issue facing this region. Our future is determined by how we focus on economic development, and we can do it if we just get leadership in these jobs who is focused on creating economic growth.
Executive Page, your response.
Well, first of all, we have to recognize what is the root cause of all of our complex problems in our region, not just economic development, and that's decades of systemic racism. It touches every complex problem we have, and we have to get it on the table when we want to address these things. We have neighborhoods that have been left behind that aren't entering the workforce as actively as others, and we need to put our resources there to show them the same opportunities as everyone else. Centene has been a civic leader. Centene has recognized this and have participated in this dialogue for a long time and put their resources in these underserved communities. As far as economic development goes, we need to do what we do best. We do life science research, plant science research very well, and we develop our economic opportunities off of those. We do startups very well. We need to continue to attract others to come to our community with those startups. We do geospatial intelligence very well, and we need to develop economic opportunities off of that and off of the market application of our life science and plant science research. There are a lot of good things going on in St. Louis area right now in St. Louis County. There's a lot to talk about, and there's a lot of opportunity.
Anyone care to follow up regarding that or economic development?
Well, the GDP for St. Louis County is about a third of what, for our region, is about a third of what the GDP is for Minneapolis. It's about half of what the GDP growth is for Pittsburgh. To suggest that our economic base is doing fine shows total ignorance with respect to our standing in the nation and in the world. If you believe Mr. Neidorff, if you believe the NFL, if you believe Amazon, there's a lot of evidence around perspectives on how we're performing. We are hurting in this respect, and naming a few industries that we've had a little bit of success on is not a solution to the problem. The solution is to the problem is being aggressive, trying to recruit communities, getting out of St. Louis County, getting on an airplane where you have to in order to recruit other businesses to come here. There are a million things we should be doing, and we're just not getting it done.
Any follow-up for anyone else?
I think it has to be said, I'll just speak for myself, but I don't believe the NFL. I don't believe the terrible things that Stan Kroenke said about this region as he kicked us in the rear end on his way out the door. But those of us who want to act in good faith rather than cater to the desires of a handful of billionaires should understand that if we work together with a little bit less political sniping and a little bit more vision for what we could be rather than what we have been, then maybe we'll get something done.
I get a kick out of Jake talking about less political sniping after he's criticized the police chief, the state government, the health department, developers, the NFL. Jake is the king of sniping. Jake throws bombs at everybody all day long. All right? I'm trying to build bridges across this community, and he's just criticizing everybody else on every side of every issue. That's not the way this community is going to progress. This community is going to progress when we come together and quit throwing stones at one another.
Response, Mr. Zimmerman?
You know, I've been a Democrat for longer than some folks on this stage, and I think back to the words of Missouri's greatest Democratic leader, Harry Truman, when they called him "Give him hell, Harry," and he just smiled and said, "I don't give him hell. I just tell the truth, and sometimes they think it's hell."
For those of you who are just joining us, you are watching the debate of the Democratic primary candidates for St. Louis County Executive. Our next question from Casey, directed to Mr. Zimmerman, involves school options during the pandemic. Casey?
Thank you, Ruth. Well, a lot of parents are worried about whether they should send their kids to in-person school or not, or keep them home and try to have their children learn virtually. Of course, that's not always an option for everyone, especially if their job requires them to be away from home. If you are a county executive, would you mandate that schools teach kids virtually or otherwise?
Well, Casey, I'm a candidate for county executive second, and I'm a parent first. My son will be 6 in a couple of weeks. He's due to start kindergarten. And like a lot of parents in this town, dear God, I hope he can start kindergarten. But what I want for him, I have to balance against what I want for everyone in this community in protecting the safety of all of our neighbors. And I have to think about the teachers. And I have to think about the essential employees, about the people who are called upon to sweep the floors in that school after the day is done. And it's unacceptable to me to privilege my child's educational needs over the broader safety of everyone. And then I think about something deeper, which is that my kid is fortunate that he'll get to attend public school in a district where if he's got to be at home, you know what? We'll make it work. And you know what? There will be enough iPads and enough virtual learning opportunities to go around. But the same can't be said for many of the more economically challenged school districts in both North and South County rather than in the Central Corridor. And so I come back to what I said before. We've got to recognize we are all in this thing together, whatever the answer is, and the answer must be driven by science and not by politics. But whatever the answer is, we've got to commit ourselves to working to benefit everyone.
Executive Page.
So I've talked about this a lot. First of all, the #1 role of the county executive is to look out for the health and welfare of everyone in St. Louis County, and that means kids, teachers, and their families. We also have to recognize that kids who fall behind in school can miss a lifetime of opportunity. But first, we have to keep them safe. I've encouraged everyone over the past week who has the option to choose virtual schooling to choose that. I've discussed this with superintendents that I'm interested in the plans that they're offering. Those plans may not be viable in 2 weeks if COVID-19 continues on its current trajectory. If we cannot get everyone in the community wearing masks, social distancing, and abiding by our crowd restrictions, then there's no way our schools can open with anything but virtual. But we have to keep our kids learning. We can't let them fall behind. And then we have to address the equity issue. This goes back to our concept and understanding of systemic racism that isn't recognized enough in our community. It touches every complex problem. It touches access to technology. We have a digital divide in St. Louis County. We have 11% of our families that don't have access to high-speed internet. And we can't just say virtual school unless we make sure all of those kids have a tablet and a hotspot so they can have virtual school. And that's what we're doing.
Thank you, Dr. Page. Mr. Mantovani.
Yeah, so I think what the other candidates are saying really pretty much boils down to it depends on the circumstances. I think it depends a lot on the school. I think it depends on the physical plant. I think in other words, how big the classrooms are. I think it depends on the enrollment of the school. I think it depends on the age of the kids. I think it depends on how much access people have to electronic opportunities for education and the like. What I do hope is that the decisions will be made in collaboration, that parents and teachers and superintendents will work together with the health department and the county executive's office on this, as opposed to us playing the Moses role again, where somebody goes up on high and descends and says, "Thou shalt do this." I don't think that's right. And I think that's why our community is struggling with the regulations that have come out of the county health department, because there's been no sense of effective collaboration. Collaboration with the science, yes, but with those people who have lives, little collaboration. And I think we have to do so much better at that if we're going to gain real collaboration or real effective acceptance of what the policies need to be.
Thank you, Mr. Mantovani. Ms. Tolliver.
Hi. So I actually had a meeting with the district superintendent of University City this morning, and it is really, really hard to try to decide whether or not your children are going to go to school, because they're not going to have an open school day at any point. and the CDC is saying that they are recommending virtual learning. But as my opponents have said, it is really hard to say that we're just going to go strictly to virtual in a world where not everybody has access to virtual. And being set behind in education will absolutely set you behind in life. And I absolutely think that we should get more of the homeschooled children, like the parents who have been actively homeschooling in general. They should have a seat at the table because they are not teaching from the same public school curriculum that the rest of us are trying to be learned from. So I think that if we could include them in the discussion, if we could include them at the table and see how it is that they are making sure their children are always seem to be above grade average, I think that that would actually help a lot of the students feel like there's not as much pressure, because a lot of them, they don't have computers often either, but they have books. There are definitely ways to educate. Before there were computers, there were things called textbooks, and I think that we should get back to the basics in a lot of ways, because we don't know when this virus is going to end. We don't know how it's going to end, and I think that we should prepare for all circumstances in all scenarios.
Thank you, Ms. Tolliver. Follow-up, Jason?
Staying on the topic of education, this could be a short yes or no answer, but the Missouri legislature is considering creating a pathway for the St. Louis Public Schools district to pay into the special school district, which serves children with physical and developmental disabilities. It's the reason I live in St. Louis County, by the way. And the county may have to vote on whether the city is allowed to adopt the tax. If that happens during the next 2 years, would you use your bully pulpit to convince city and county voters to vote yes on it? Mr. Mantovani, we'll start with you.
Look, I have a grandchild who is profoundly deaf. I understand what it means to have special needs, and it is imperative that we provide extraordinary educational opportunities for kids across the region. What are we going to care about kids from the city, but we're not going to care about kids in the county, but not care about kids in the city? That's not who we are as a people. That's not who I want to be. We need to make certain that everybody gets the care that they need.
Dr. Page.
Yes, I would certainly support the expansion of opportunities for kids in St. Louis City to access special school district services. Absolutely.
Ms. Tolliver.
Absolutely, yes. I think that it is, to the rest of the world, we are just St. Louis, and to say that we're going to segregate our educational practices is egregious. It does not make any sense whatsoever, and it absolutely makes sense to make sure that those who have special needs and their parents, that they are receiving services.
Mr. Zimmerman.
Yes, and more broadly, if this pandemic has taught us nothing, hasn't it taught us that we're all in this thing together, and that we are judged by how we treat the most challenged among us and not the most privileged among us? And maybe if we could learn that lesson as a region, we'd all be a little better off.
Time now for the lightning round. These are yes or no answers to the following questions. Should St. Louis City join St. Louis County as a municipality like Florissant or Maryland Heights? Ms. Tolliver.
I do not believe that a merger is appropriate at this time.
Mr. Zimmerman, yes or no?
Not without a majority vote of both the voters of the city and the voters of the county.
Executive Page.
Both the city voters and the county voters would need to adopt that before it could happen.
Mr. Mantovani?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's a majority rule question in both locations.
Next question. Should any city-county merger be decided by a statewide vote? Ms. Tolliver.
Absolutely. It should be up to the people.
Mr. Zimmerman?
Not just no, but hell no. What was wrong with Better Together was they tried to shove it down our throats, and it's not okay.
Executive Page.
Better Together was about control of the airport. It wasn't about a merger. But any decision about what happens for government for St. Louis County or St. Louis City should be determined by their voters and no other voters.
Yes or no, Mr. Mantovani?
No, it has to be determined just by us. I don't want a guy riding a tractor in the boot heel telling me how to run our government.
Now, this is a yes or no question. Should St. Louis County require masks in public? Ms. Tolliver.
Yes.
Mr. Zimmerman.
Yes.
Executive Page.
Absolutely, and any public health order should not be politicized. We're in the position we are because of that.
Mr. Mantovani.
I agree.
Should there be a county manager to handle county contracts? Ms. Tolliver.
Yes.
Mr. Zimmerman.
The professional staff of St. Louis County government needs to be more empowered, not less.
Executive Page.
I ask for and initiated ethics reform that separates the procurement process from politics in St. Louis County. Absolutely, yes.
Mr. Mantovani.
Yeah, I agree. I think the procurement process has to be legitimized, and that's a good way to do it.
We have another audience question. This comes from Lisa Cagle, and she asks, what will you commit to regarding funding transit operations? And will you support a low-income discount fare program to connect vulnerable families to jobs, schools, grocery stores, and other opportunities? You each have a minute to respond. Mr. Zimmerman.
Well, I might even suggest going a step farther and looking at the really bold experiment that our neighbors in Kansas City did in attempting to make transit free, to see how it stimulated development and helped people with the critical needs of going to work. You know, it strikes me that the state of Missouri has shortchanged this region for years, both through the legislature and through MoDOT's process. And this is another one of those places where it's time to stop playing footsie with the Republicans in Jeff City, and it's time to stand up for what's ours.
Executive Page.
Public transportation in our community is critical for many families to get to work, to get to school, and you would be surprised to see how many of our essential workers depend on public transportation. That's why we have to keep them safe, and that's why we have to value it. We certainly have many programs for discounted services for people who need help, and I would support any expansion of services on a needs base that would connect more people to public transportation. It really is one of the cornerstones of good, solid economic development in our community.
Time's up.
Yeah, so look, transportation, everybody who studies poverty and whatnot will tell you that transportation is one of the most crucial elements of improvement of economic outcomes across a region. So anything that we can do to enhance our public mass transit makes sense to me. But I'm not going to let the question go without commenting about the unsafe situation on Metrolink. There are more people who are not riding Metrolink today because they are unsafe, because they feel like they're at risk of violent crime. And this is a paramount obligation that the county government should be dealing with, and it just has not been dealing with it. It's been kicking the can down the road now for a couple of years. Metrolink is in the tank financially because of this. We've got to get a handle on this. And the financial network of our transportation system is compromised severely because the ridership of Metrolink is so compromised out of fear of violence.
Thank you. Ms. Tolliver.
Absolutely, there should be a discount program in place for the Metro public transportation. If you can discount movie tickets for students and seniors, you can absolutely discount the transportation that it's going to take for them for everyone in the city and the county to make it to work, to make it home, to make it to school, to make it to see family members. The fact that transportation is so big, and we're talking about economic growth and growth for businesses and growth and expansion, how can we grow and expand if we can't even commute from place to place within our city? So I think that absolutely there should be discounted. I would absolutely have to agree with Zimmerman that we should experiment with some things being free. But to piggyback off of the violence issue, I definitely think that growth is dependent upon how much we are able to encourage people to go out and use the transportation system.
Thank you. We have time for one last question from Casey. You won't quite have as much time to respond. Casey.
I want to know if you have any interest in defunding the police, and if you'll allow me to define it for the sake of this conversation, like I think Jason and I have heard from certain people in the protest, and that is it's not necessarily shutting down the police or pulling all the funding from the police, but maybe fewer armored vehicles and more money for social services or social workers or jobs programs. As it is defined in that way, Mr. Zimmerman, do you see any value in the slogan "defund the police"?
Well, I oppose defunding the police, but I strongly support transforming policing and making policing a great deal more accountable in this community. I'm the only person on this stage to have released a detailed plan for police accountability, and I'd encourage folks to look at my website. But it starts with the core principle, which is that guns and batons should be the last resort, not the first response to our social needs.
Thank you very much. Executive Page, you have 30 seconds.
Well, our police department needs to be well-staffed and well-trained and responsible for their actions and inactions. And we are completely reviewing, a top-to-bottom review in county government of our police department, how it operates and where we need to put our resources, including the concept of embedding social workers and nurses in our police department to respond to some of these calls that just aren't public safety calls, either substance abuse or other challenges that should be taken care of by someone who is not a law enforcement officer. We are a top-to-bottom review of county police department and looking to see what we can do better.
Mr. Mantovani.
Policing is evolving all over America, and that's a great thing. Police officers recognize that they want to get better at their job. Nothing aggravates a good police officer more than a bad cop. Accountability is in order. And so I think it's of paramount importance that we recognize that our police are willing and looking forward to evolving. Now, with respect to the question of whether we should be allocating those resources elsewhere, I think as policing evolves, it's going to be more expensive, not less expensive.
Thank you.
There's going to be more training, there's going to be more social workers and whatnot. So I'm hesitant to commit to reducing the funds.
We have to go to Ms. Tolliver.
So I do not believe that we should defund the police. As he has said, that does not necessarily mean taking away the funds, but I absolutely believe that we should reallocate the funds so that they are better used and they are better appropriated, because education and training are key. Because absolutely, the reason that our violence records are so high in the United States at large is because our police officers are not as well trained as they are in other countries. And let's be clear that the history of the police is rooted in systemic racism.
Thank you very much. For our closing statements, each candidate is going to have about a minute for the closing statement. Now, the order in which you're going to speak was determined by a drawing of your names out of a hat before this broadcast. And here's the order for the closing statements. Executive Page, Ms. Tolliver, Mr. Zimmerman, and Mr. Mantovani. Executive Page.
Thank you. We are at a time of crisis in the history of our county. We have not faced a challenge like COVID-19 in 100 years. And there's nothing that prepares one for life or death decisions than a career of making life or death decisions. And my background as a medical doctor has prepared me for these tough decisions, and they are tough decisions, and they will be criticized across the board because they don't make everyone happy. But my job and everyone's job in this role is to protect the health and welfare of everyone in St. Louis County, and that's where my focus will always be. And we have a couple of tough years ahead of us. We heard today about the excitement of vaccine production here in St. Louis County, but we are not through this yet. We will get through it. We will get through it together, but leadership is important, and this is a very, very tough time in the history of St. Louis County.
Ms. Tolliver.
So the point of leadership is service. We should be serving the people that we are leading. And in a lot of ways, the system, as it has always been working, has not always been working. And so I think that it is time that we take a close look at the system and that we address the issues that we have right now. And I think that when we look at environment, when we look at education, when we look at health care, when we look at social justice, those systems are broken. And it's time for us to make sure that we fix them. And to echo the words of Shirley Chisholm, I am not the black candidate, although I am black and proud. I am not the female candidate, although I am proud of that as well. I am the candidate for the people, and I make sure that I want everything that my office would do. As county executive, I will make sure that the communities work together and communicate with one another and educate each other on the history that makes things work.
Thank you. Mr. Zimmerman.
I want to thank you for putting on this forum, because I think it shows that there's a real choice here. There are real substantive differences between the people on this stage. And while everyone wants to make this region better, we have some profound differences about how to get there. And look, the big money, the corporate special interests, the Republican megadonors, they've spoken. And they've sent their money to two other people on this stage. $25,000 at a time from the big shot Republicans to one of my opponents, $250,000 at a time from corporate special interests looking for something in return. But I've got something better than them. I've got you. I've got a universe full of people throughout St. Louis County who understand that real change is hard, who understand that the status quo isn't acceptable, who understand that we've got to do better because lives depend on it. I know that the people of this community believe that together we can overcome the twin pandemics of this virus and institutional racism. And I know that together we will fix this, because we must.
Mr. Mantovani.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having this event. I appreciate it very much. Look, the fact is that our region is hurting. Our population is in decline. Our economic base is in decline. Poverty is rising. Crime is rising. Racial disparities are rising. And we have two candidates on this stage here tonight who have been running for office for 20 years. That's what they do. They run and run and run and run, right? And during the terms of their service as public officials, our community has suffered, our people have suffered. We've been passed by other communities around the world. Look, I believe that St. Louis can reestablish its place as a prominent community in America. There's a brighter day for us if we change our leadership. We're falling behind other communities not because of the people, but because of substandard leadership. We can do better if we open our minds and hearts to a different kind of leadership. We have to do this. We have to do it for our kids and our grandkids and those who come after us. Look.
We have to cut that off. We are out of time. I'm so sorry, Mr. Mantovani. That is all the time we have for tonight. I'd like to thank all of our candidates, Mark Mantovani, Sam Page, Jamie Tolliver, and Jake Zimmerman, journalist Jason Rosenbaum and Casey Nolen, as well as our media partners, the 9 Network, St. Louis Public Radio, and 5 on Your Side. The primary is August 4th. Be sure to vote. Good night.
I'm Jim Kerr. Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association. Missouri produces wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details on the variety of products made in the state are at choosewood.com.